Welcome back to the Pulse for Good channel. Today on the channel we're going to be talking about what driving, and particularly the process of signaling, checking your mirror, and checking your blind spot, can tell you about feedback. Now, I don't know if any of you are similar to me, but one of the things I remember from driver's ed, right? So I grew up in Utah. In Utah, the age to drive is 16. It's a little different. I grew up so far north in Utah that you can see the Idaho border. In Idaho, at least when I grew up, the age to drive was 14. And so you had this little disparity in ages there. But for me, the age that I could drive was 16. And so as a 15-year-old, I enrolled in a class called Driver's Education. This was a public class that was taught at all the high schools. And so I went in and was able to teach. And I still remember sitting at my desk. And I was just sitting there, the teacher asked us to practice this movement, right? So pretend you had a steering wheel, and you would do this thing where you do the signal, you check your mirror, and you check your blind spot. I had no idea why we did this, right? No idea. I had no clue. But I would do it. I would signal, I would check my mirror, and I'd check my blind spot. Now, I admit over time, after driver's ed, I still remember the signal, mirror, blind spot, over and over again. But it became a little more lazy, right? It was more like signal, mirror, kind of blind spot, right? And then eventually signal, mirror, and then eventually just, kind of signal, just assume. Till one day I was driving. Dangerous thing to do. And I turned right onto a road and immediately wanted to get in the left lane. And so signaled, went to move over, immediately had a blaring horn and realized someone was in that lane. Right? It was a little scary. I had signaled. I had even checked my mirror, but I hadn't checked my blind spot. Now, maybe some of you have done this. Maybe some of you have had this experience. Maybe some of you have been in the other side of this equation, been in that car where someone doesn't check their blind spot. Now, why is it a blind spot? Right? It's called a blind spot because it's not seen through your mirrors. And obviously, it's something you're not seeing forward. And so it's just this little spot that you need to be able to turn, do some physical activity, and be able to see behind you. Now, what does all of this have to do with gathering feedback? Well, you see, often we gather feedback like we drive. We send out a simple survey, kind of like putting on a blinker or signaling, right? We might even think about trying to address more people that may be a little uncomfortable sharing. And we're checking our mirrors. We're looking behind us. We're making sure, we think we've covered everybody. But how often do we check our blind spot? And what do I mean by that, right? Well, when we send out surveys, most groups that conduct surveys and most providers of surveys, be it technological or otherwise, have some default assumptions. And a lot of times these assumptions are based around power dynamics, right? So, for instance, if I'm a consumer of a good, the power dynamics between me and the person producing that good in a capitalist society tends to be fairly level. I have the choice to not buy the good, right? I have power. The person selling it also has the choice not to sell it to me, right? So take, for instance, in a situation where this power dynamic isn't necessarily so static. A car dealership. I come in and I want a car. There's a price I'm willing to pay and a price they're willing to sell it for. And this is negotiable, right? How many times have you been talked into paying a little bit more for something? And at the same time, as a consumer or a producer, how many times have you sold something for a little less than you wanted to? Right? It just happens. But both parties have a fairly equal power dynamic to be able to walk away when they need without really any major problems here. If I walk away from not buying a car, the car dealership is totally still willing to sell me one tomorrow. And if I don't get a car, for the most part, it's not going to affect my life in a way that's a tremendous detriment. Now, this is the assumption that almost all survey systems are built on, right? The signal, the mirror, and the assumption that there's nobody next to you that you can't see. The problem is, not all situations have this balanced power disparity. Take, for instance, if you are a refugee, you're coming into a country, and you're dealing with a refugee service provider. In this situation, the power disparity is definitely not equal. There's not a lot the refugee can do that influences the provider. The provider can basically do whatever they want. This situation is exacerbated all over the place and leads to issues. I mean, we see it all the time in situations where there is this power disparity, and a boss takes advantage of an employee. Somebody in a position of power taking advantage of somebody else. All of these are these power dynamics that make surveying a little hard, right? So how do you check your blind spot? How do you offer surveys for groups that may not understand completely how at risk they are, or may have an inflated view of the risk, or maybe they're appropriately gauging the risk? Regardless, how do you try and hit those groups that are reluctant to share? Well, I'll give you two quick tips, right? And this is all we do. We work to try and help organizations meet and understand, see their blind spots, and build that pattern, that signal mirror blind spot into them so they don't run people off the road. Right. So the first tip is provide anonymity. Now, if you've listened to our channel, if you've read our stuff, you know we hark on this all over the place. Anonymity is your best friend when it comes to trying to get honest feedback. Now, what about trolls and those type of things? Yes, they're there. Somebody may comment on this on YouTube about trolls. Yeah. And anonymity brings out the worst in people. It's true. But anonymity also provides some of the only cover that people need to be able to share incredibly important truths. Think of the witness protection program, right? There is an anonymity there, right? I'm a witness, and then I'm going to literally have a different life afterwards because I need that protection. That's what it takes to share those truths. Now, it's an extreme case, but another case is whistleblowing in the government. If I whistleblow for any government agency, I'm protected by anonymity. That anonymity is a shield. You can offer that shield to the clients, the patients, the citizens, the students, whoever it is that you're funding, that you're helping, that you're working with, and they can use that shield then to offer the feedback that you need to improve. The second piece of advice, and this should not be a surprise, is please, for the love, use technology, right? The problem is not only are paper surveys inefficient, a manual process is really hard, it is incredibly hard to maintain anonymity with paper surveys. Just imagine for a second me handing you a survey, asking you hard questions that may make you feel uncomfortable, and then expecting that to come back to me and me not to read it. It's a big ask, right? That's why technology works so well. It can be recorded without me having any opportunity to be able to see the feedback in this context, and only be able to see it in an aggregated context where now I can identify who gave it. I can still respond and fix problems, but I'm not going to blame you. I'm not going to take any services away from you, and I'm going to make sure you still have that psychological safety you need to do the most important job that you have. These are a few reasons to remember to check your blind spot, right? Don't bowl people over. Signal, mirror, blind spot. Close a feedback loop by offering psychologically safe opportunities for people to share.